This morning we're going to continue on in the book of John. We've been in there for a while, but we'll be looking at chapter 13. And we'll be reading from verse 12 through verse 20. John chapter 13, verses 12 through verse 20. Let me read it to you. And this is a continuation after Jesus finished washing his disciples' feet. He has another lesson that he wants to make sure that they don't forget. Not only about how loving one another as he loved them shows and demonstrates that they're disciples and really is the characteristic that he wants them to demonstrate. But he teaches them another lesson from this foot washing. John chapter 13, verse 12. When he had washed their feet and put on his outer garments and resumed his place, he said to them, "Do you understand what I have done to you? You call me teacher and Lord, and you are right, for so I am. If I then, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you also ought to wash one another's feet. For I have given you an example that you also should do just as I have done to you. Truly, truly, I say to you, a servant is not greater than his master, nor is a messenger greater than the one who sent him. If you know these things, blessed are you if you do them. I am not speaking of all of you. I know whom I have chosen. But the scripture will be fulfilled. He who ate my bread has lifted his heel against me. I am telling you this now, before it takes place, that when it does take place, you may believe that I am he. Truly, truly, I say to you, whoever receives the one I send receives me, and whoever receives me receives the one who sent me." Amen. One of the biggest lessons that I've learned serving in various churches, working as an engineer for about a year and a half, which is kind of a shorter thing, is that eventually in your life you're going to meet all different kinds of leadership, positional, your bosses at work, people who are the ones that created an organization or a club that you want to belong to. Or in my case, for most of my adult life, I'm serving at various churches with different leadership. And the way that churches usually, and this is not necessarily biblical or whatnot, but in almost all the churches that I've served at, there is what we know as a senior pastor, and then there's a staff. So, the senior pastor is like the CEO, the president, whatever you want to call it. And one of the things that has struck me, and it took me a long time to kind of realize, is that much of my understanding of leadership came from my family background, my understanding from what I saw in the world and the different forms of leadership that I saw through sporting teams or clubs or organizations or vocationally. And I think it hasn't really changed for a long time, but more recently there's been some shifts. But I was very fascinated because there was something about the leadership that I often saw that did not resonate with me. And one of the reasons I believe that helped me to really accept Jesus Christ for who he was, who he proclaimed to be, is because of the nature of the leadership that Christ demonstrated. If you know one of the most famous things that Jesus says about leadership, it's this. He says, I have come, I, the Son of God, the one that's God incarnate, the highest being, if you will, in the universe, I have come not to be served, but to serve. And so, in the gospel, 2,000 years ago, in Jesus Christ, in all of human history, there's never really been exemplified to this extent the juxtaposition, the merging of leadership and servanthood together, because it's never been true. It's never, ever been lived out. It's never been demonstrated in quite that way. There's always been the master and the servant, the boss, the worker. There's always been this hierarchical system throughout the world, and pretty much that's the way that it exists in this world still today. And so it's rare and far in between where we find true leadership that is, not just has an aspect of servanthood, but is exemplified, is thoroughly characterized by servanthood. In our minds, when we think about that, we think maybe a company that's led by someone who has a servanthood would not be very prosperous, would not be very aggressive, would not be very profitable. Or we may think an organization that's led by a servant leader, someone who's really exemplified and characterized by servant would seem very weak and very, just a nice guy kind of a thing. But Jesus kind of blows all of that out of the water, and it's something that you and I have to understand. If we don't understand this servant leadership, then what we're going to end up having in our own lives, in our own roles of leadership, is a distortion of what Christ actually wants us to have. And another thing that this helps, when you understand what servant leadership looks like, you'll do so much better in picking the right people to work with, in picking the right people to tie yourself to in terms of an organization or a startup or some kind of company. Because I'm going to tell you something. What's going to affect your life a lot is who you choose to follow. And that's going to be demonstrated by who chooses to follow you. And the difference is that when you follow someone because of what they do for you, what you can gain from them, or what goals or visions or passions they have, that's all great. But ultimately, it isn't the best way. The person that you choose to follow should have this heart of servanthood. And let me just give you one foundational definition. And if you understand this, I think you can extrapolate a lot of what I'm going to say this morning from this passage. But I want you to just understand this foundational thing about leadership and about servanthood. What I see when I see leaders who truly have servanthood is this. The difference between servanthood and work or active doing something or pursuing a goal is this. All of those other things, ultimately, when you just go down to the very core bottom-based nature of it is, they use and develop people to accomplish a goal. Whereas true servant leadership is more interested in developing people to accomplish it. I know that sounds so subtle, but ultimately, they don't mind if it takes a long time, but they want the people to be developed correctly. And if you really think about that carefully, that makes so much business sense. It's just that we live in a world where everything has to happen so quickly. The fiscal year ends, or the results have to be given out, or the stockholders won't be happy, or if you don't get the grade now, then your teacher or your parents or whoever else isn't happy, isn't satisfied. We need immediate results. We need something to happen right away. And the truth is we live in a society where our maxim, where our motto, where our thought, and even if you don't fully believe this is the way you live, we want long-term gain for short-term investments. I mean, if you could write a book about how to get long-term gain or huge gains from short-term investment in the stock market, in anything, you're going to make millions of dollars. Actually, you shouldn't even write the book. You should just save it for yourself and make all that money on your own, right? For me, I totally get that, because that's what we want. We want to invest just a little bit and get a lot. We want the home run. We want that once in a million thing. We want the startup IPO. We want to get into the company that's just going to blow up, and we just have the right timing, the right place, and it won't have to be there 1 year or 2 years or 3 years, and we're set for the rest of the run. That's what we want. We want to invest a little bit in our relationship, a few minutes, and then we want our relationship to be phenomenal and wonderful. But the problem is ultimately what that really says about us is that we're not enjoying the people. We're not enjoying the development and seeing the growth of the person as much as what we want is the goal in front. And I know me, I'm actually, my personality type is I've always been goal-oriented, I've always been task-oriented and seeing productivity, and so it took me a long time to realize over the years about who I was and how I saw this and why things were bothering me, because ultimately what I saw was a lot of people who were successful achieve goals, but there was a lot of brokenness, a lot of broken relationships with their family, with their coworkers, with their employees, with their team along the way. And ultimately, that kind of success is no success at all. So Jesus, after he washes his disciples' feet, Last week we talked about how he said, this is how I'm going to love you. But there's this other part of love, and we talked about it a little bit last week, which is this sacrificial action. And I think Jesus wants to point that one out very clearly because he's saying, to say I love you and to feel maybe even I love someone is great. But you have to understand what I did. Because this is how we ought to live day in and day out. We need to learn to live a life of servanthood. It's not something that we use very often. I mean, when have you ever used the word servant? None of us are maybe that rich to have, and we wouldn't even call our quote-unquote servants people what they call 100. You wouldn't call, yes, I have servants at my house. Yeah, that sounds so pretentious, right? We don't do that nowadays. We just say, oh, we have a nanny, or we have a help, or we have someone that cleans the house, or maybe, I mean, if you are, but it's not a good, nice word. It's kind of a dirty word. It's kind of like a demeaning word. And the idea of servanthood is so simple. The idea of servanthood that Jesus is giving is someone who blesses other people, someone who helps, someone who gives, someone who takes care of the need of another. It's a very beautiful definition. Jesus saw the need of their feet condition. And so he did it. And it says after he gets up and he puts his clothes back on, maybe the disciples are in shock. Peter says, Lord, never. And then he says, unless I wash you, you have nothing to do with me. And then Peter lets him, and all the disciples let him wash their feet. And they're wondering, okay, like this guy's unusual. Every time he does something, we don't quite understand. And now he's blowing out of the water all their concepts of authority, of hierarchy, of who's high and who's low, of servanthood. He's turning everything upside down, and he says this. He says, do you understand what I have done to you? Do you understand what I have done to you? That's such a great question for us to ask. Let me ask you guys something. If you look back in your life, I don't know, whatever you see, maybe from school, maybe from your parents, maybe from somebody else outside your extended family, or somebody, an older person that took an interest in you and helped you to grow or develop, whether it be a sport, whether it be academically or just emotional, get through something. The thing that I would think that you would all say in common is, I really felt that person cared about me as an individual. Maybe it was a teacher and she had 30 kids, or he had 30 kids. But when you had a need, they saw it, and they served you. They cared about you specifically. I'm not talking about favoritism, but they saw it, and somehow they did something to help meet that need, or help you get over the hump, or encourage you, or challenge you, or push you. Servanthood is not always coming along and just, oh, what can I do to help you? No, sometimes it's to push you. Sometimes it's to shove you ahead. Sometimes it's to say harsh truths to you. But it's in order to meet someone's need, and it's in order to help them to grow or to get past something. And here where Jesus says, do you know what I have done to you? And we don't have recorded any kind of response. You know why? Because honestly, they didn't know. They said, okay, you washed our feet. You washed our feet. You did something really unusual. Have any of you had someone that's very high up, or someone that you think would never notice you, take notice of you and encourage you? When I was in high school, I didn't think I was like the best at anything or anything like that. And this teacher didn't say I was the best at anything either. But he gave me responsibilities that I never had. My parents, never gave me like full responsibility or anything. But he gave me, I think I shared this a little bit, but in my senior year in high school, my teacher gave me the responsibility to teach the class on a weekly basis for a whole quarter. Which, when I think about it now, man, that's not, whatever, right? But I still remember that so vividly because it gave me confidence that I didn't have before. And, okay, I don't know if you guys, I think I shared something, but I was a computer nerd in the early stages of computer nerd. You guys don't even understand, like, the way that it was. But me and this other kid were, like, the two biggest nerds. And so I in that area, I was so fascinated by computers when they first came out. Did you guys know that one of the first publicly available computers was from Radio Shack? That was a Radio Shack computer. You guys are all too like, there was and it had 16K memory. And we thought, 16,000 bits of 16K is nothing. You know what I'm saying? I was like, you can't even save a photo with 16K, right? But it was like those monochromatic things, and we just were having such a kick out of these early computers. And I was just so fascinated. I started reading all these things, and so he said, hey, you can teach this class, this lesson to the the computer, basic computer science class. And so I did. It was really fun. And that just, gave me a lifelong, desire for those kind of things. But what you find is that there's these people in your life that see something in you. And Jesus is saying this to his disciples. I see in all of you, you're all one day going to be future leaders, but I want you to learn how to not just be task-oriented, but to see the heart and needs of it. You know what a great boss, a great leader does? They don't somehow push the right buttons to get them to be as productive as possible. They see into their lives and see what might be hurting them or hindering them. They look deeper into their psyche, into everything about them. They want to know about them in order not just for them to be more effective for the company's sake or the project's sake, for that person to flourish in every area of their life. That will obviously roll over and flow over to the company as well. A servant leader builds people, not things. A servant leader is the one that we all strive to be. As you guys know, most of you guys are in a one life stage behind me, but everybody that's in my life stage is in the Korean congregation right now, because the youth kids. Both my girls now in youth group, right? And so it's fascinating because I end up talking with a lot of the moms because they all do these things to prep for whatever youth group stuff is going. And I don't always go, but when I have a chance, I go help. And typical, I guess, Asian Korean thing, they're always prepping food, typical moms. They're making food for the youth group or some event or whatever. So I like to cook, so I'll go in there and help, and I end up chatting with them. And it's really interesting because they're all in my life stage. They're all in the same age range, and a lot of them were the age that my wife was, and stuff like that. So, and most of them actually, you'd be surprised, they speak English pretty well, but Korean is the more dominant language. But as we're talking and as we're discussing and we're going through all this thing, what's really fascinating? They really get a kick out of hearing the way I think about some things. But when I talk with them, they always ask me as a pastor and then as a guy, because unfortunately, a lot of the dads aren't as involved. They say, how do you get your kid to go into, of course I was raised in the college, to get into a better school, because they have all these concerns for their kids that are now going to go off to college, if you know what I'm saying. And what's fascinating to me is, and I'm not saying I do this way better than them, but the one thing that I keep coming back to, I said, what's your goal for your child? And when I asked that question, they all said, well, and this is almost universal, and it's a really good, nice parent sentiment. For them to be happy, for them to have a secure future economically, for them to do something they really enjoy and have a passion about. And I'm like, those are all awesome things. All awesome. But do you see what's missing in that definition? It's about them being accomplished, comfortable, secure, happy. That's all good. But I hope I'm not overly condescending or too critical of them. But what I say is, biblically, what does Jesus want from them? What's really going to make these young men and women outstanding in the world? Make them to be people who bless others wherever they go. At school, at work. The person that everybody goes wow, this person just blesses, they add so much in life. Because if it's that person, then connected with whatever GPA God ability they gave them, whatever gifting and talenting, I'm telling you, they will eventually be found by the right people and say, this is the person I want on my team. It may not be the smartest, the best, the strongest, all these things, but if they have that kind of characteristics, because we live in a world where everything works better in teamwork, and nobody does anything on their own. It's not possible. And if you are in that kind of situation, you already know the limitations that there are. And if you teach your children servant leadership, how to bless others, how to see people, no matter what their personality, their gifting, then guess what? They're always going to be in there. They're always going to be successful in whatever career, whatever path that you choose. Trust me, at my age now, I have a bunch of my friends who are now senior level enough that they're headhunters, or they end up, not headhunters, but they end up being the ones that interview and hire people. And it's funny, they said, when I first started hiring people, I would look at the resume and be impressed. I would look at the way that they look and the way that they present themselves and be impressed. But over the years now, I realized from my own mistakes of who I hired and how they worked out, what I realize now is it's not the best, the brightest, the best school, but what they actually now begin to look for is who has this heart to work in a team environment, who can really be glue. I look for glue people is what a lot of them say. That's an amazing truth. Are we glue people? Are we servant leaders? When you look at this 12 ragtag group of 12, you know what held them together? Jesus Christ. His heart. That was their commonality. After Jesus says, do you understand what I've done to you? He says, you call me teacher and Lord, and you're right, for so I am. If I then, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you also ought to wash one another's. I want you to understand something. When Jesus says, I am the teacher and the Lord, it means I'm the leader. That's obvious. It's beyond doubt. But I am a person who serves. And so this is the whole thing. May I encourage you, because this is the essence that I always come back and measure my own self about, as a dad, as a friend, as a pastor, and honestly, I'm nowhere near where I want to be. But am I really serving? See, oftentimes I get caught up in the same things. When I look at my girls, Catherine's right now getting all her scholarships and college apps and those things ready. We're doing it ahead of time. She's going to be applying and then attending college in 2019 in the fall. And so we're going through all of that process right now. And what's really interesting is that I can feel in the back of my mind things popping up that I have to push back down. I was like, what's the best school I can get into? What's the most amount of scholarships I have to pay all that money? And even things like, so I can tell my mom, and my mom will be proud of how well Catherine did, and indirectly, of course, how well I raised her and all that. But that's all these voices that are in the back of your mind. Come on, all of us want to be proud of our children. Oh, good SAT score, good school she got into, success. Okay, all of that. But then I think back and I go, no, but what I want Catherine is to be this real whole person. What's my goal for her ultimately? And to push that back a little bit helps so much, because then I know maybe she won't get into the best college per se if I pushed her completely and that's all we did. But at the same time, I want her to flourish and grow and have the right understanding of what it is. I want her to see in me a consistency of saying, this is who I want you to be, and then what I demonstrate in my behavior. If I say, I want you really to be a servant leader, I want you to be someone who really learns how to bless other people, and then I push all these things about, but you have to get this grade, you have to do this, and you have to accomplish this, then she's going to get the message that if I don't meet these goals, I'm not going to be a worthy person. And I said, no. Meeting goals and all those things are things that you should strive for, but being a wholesome, healthy, blessing, loving person, serving person is what I desire. To know Christ and to make him to serve as his servant. And you know what the blessing of that's going to be? You're going to teach your children how to pick a spouse. You're going to teach your children how to pick a job. You're going to teach your children how to pick true friends. You're going to teach your children how to get through difficult times and how to push through them. A few nights ago, and I almost never go through this, I woke up at like 2 in the morning, and I had a little bit of an anxiety attack. It just never happens. I mean, it was gone in like 30 minutes. But the anxiety I had all of a sudden was like thinking about, Catherine's going off to call. Another thing that's happened recently is that I'm sending her out of the country for 2 weeks in March, right? She's going to be going off by herself. She's going to be going to Burma, Myanmar, and she's going to be going with her aunt, meeting her aunt in Hong Kong, going to Burma, and then doing a Habitat for Humanity house build in Myanmar, which just kind of popped up, so we understand, she's never been on the airplane by herself. She's never been out of the country by herself. So this is like our first big step and things like that. And I'm all playing it cool, right? And I had this anxiety attack about she's going to be going off to college. She's going to be going off to Asia on her own. And I looked up the website about Myanmar and the U.S. government, things like these are cities you should not go to, it's all listed out. And it's going to be like 90 degrees, and so you should have malaria pills, and you should have these kinds of updates in your. So I'm calling the doctors, getting all that stuff and stuff. I mean, Catherine also realized and said to me the other day, and this is maybe part of the anxiety, she's like, "Oh, Dad, I just realized." I go, "What?" "I'm going by myself on the airplane." And I'm like, "Duh, yeah, you're the only." She's like, "I'm saying, well, there'll be 200 other people on the airplane." And then she goes, can I have some kind of guidance? And I'm like, okay, I'll look into the airport. Like the airlines do for minor. So maybe all of that fed on my mind, so I got like, oh, it's like anxiety happens. We're going to have anxiety. We're going to have stress. But the thing that came back to me is, I don't know what college she's going to go to. I don't know what she's going to do in the future of her life. And those things, if you try to choose for your child where to go to college, what job to pursue, what career, to make money, or these kind of things, ultimately, I think that's the message they're going to get. And they may succeed in that, but they're not going to be ultimately as happy with your guidance or with their lives. And what took away some of my anxiety was like, okay, I got to just continually teach Catherine about God and His love for her. And that even when I'm not with her, and then I start taking notes and writing stuff down. I gotta emphasize this at the meal times. I gotta sit and chat with them. Men and women, this whole thing about servant leadership, it affects all of our lives. And if we don't really take that to heart, what's going to end up happening is we're going to shoot ourselves in the foot. Let me end just by saying this. Right now, and I'm not going to give any specifics or anything like that, but right now, there's a lot of expose that's been happening. And I think it's about time in some ways, but it's happening in all kinds of ways. But it's always been going on. It's just that it's not been as mediocre. And I'll tell you one thing. The reason why some of these companies and some of these people are rotted out in the core, and I feel bad for them, and I know for me too, it's the same thing for me too, to struggle through these things, is because the organizations weren't led by people who understood servant leadership. Anything that is led by human leadership eventually that's my investment philosophy. I want to know who the top leadership is, and truly, if I can find out their character, then I'm much more interested in investing in that company. How can we do that? That's ultimately what it is. I found this to be true of churches. I found this to be true of companies. I found this to be true of friends. I found this to be true of people I looked up to. That if they ultimately don't embrace it, it may be 5, 10, 15, 20, 50 years on, maybe after their life is over that it's found out, but it will be exposed. it will last. And that's why Jesus says, you will be blessed if you do this, but if not, ultimately, whatever you do, whatever you build, will cave in on itself. May we understand this truth. Maybe in the short run, following the ways of the world, the hierarchical, dictatorial, positional leadership might work. It does work. I don't know. But ultimately, it will all fall down. It will not last. This is why Paul says you can build in this life either with precious jewels and gold, or with wood, hay, and stone. And it will come that when you build with precious jewels and gold, it will last. If you build with hay, wood, and stubble, it will burn. That's the reality. Or building children and maturing them in the kingdom of God to be servant leaders. Or are we building them up to be affluent, successful, all of that which? Are we developing in ourselves character and servanthood? And here's the amazing thing. You can exercise this in your marriage, in your parenting, in your work, in your school, in your families, in your friends, and in the church. And I pray, and I encourage you. The beauty of servanthood is it is the foundation of genuine community. And we need to change it. So may I encourage you. There's a bigger lesson for us to learn in Jesus washing his disciples. That common shared experience of being served. This is why this story is so prominent in John and in a few other Gospels, because it affected them, it impacted them, and they remembered it really. And whenever they got too high, whenever they got too haughty, everybody's saying, wow, you're the man, you're the apostle, you're the great one.